welcome to Rising. Welcome to another week. We'll be covering the news, and every day we just relish doing it. How was your weekend, Briahna?
My weekend was action-packed. I did the hack where you fill your Friday with a lot of fun activities, and you make your Saturday feel like a Sunday, and it's like a three-day weekend in your head.
Oh, you're playing 4D chess with your.
That's what I'm doing.
With the weekend. I did some rollerblading.
I saw on the social medias you're more than enough.
Okay. What are we talking about today?
Well, Robby, this weekend, the Netherlands and Denmark committed to granting Ukraine's longtime request for U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets. President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed the move in a recent video posted to social media. Let's watch.
Які ми використаємо, щоб тримати російських терористів подалі від українських міст і сил. F-16 неодмінно дадуть нову енергію, впевненість, нову мотивацію для і воїнів, і для цивільного населення, і дадуть, я впевнений, новий результат для України і всієї Європи.
Meanwhile, new reporting offered up over at the Washington Post contends that the Ukrainian army is successfully exploiting Biden's cluster bomb gamble by unleashing the controversial and deadly weapons along battle lines to push Russian soldiers back. Cluster bombs, which since 2008 have been outlawed in more than 120 countries, have a high dud rate and are known to explode years or even decades after war's end. One cluster munition watchdog estimates that upwards of 90,000 civilians have been killed by this weapon since the 1960s.
Meanwhile, journalist Glenn Greenwald tweeted, "The group that by far most supports the U.S. fueling of the war in Ukraine is self-identified liberal Dems, even as Western media admits the counteroffensive is failing. One major reason is they loathe Russia due to 2016 and are thus willing to destroy Ukraine to harm Moscow." I mean, this is the ongoing tension. And I do think that when the United States government chooses to act in ways that human rights organizations across the world and every government, I think almost every government has banned cluster munitions except for
not us,
States,
not Russia, not Ukraine.
Exactly. So when you are so much on the wrong side of it, this isn't even a left-right issue. This is a global consensus versus not issue. You open yourself up as the Democrats who are promoting these policies. You open yourself up to the criticism that you are not the real anti-war party,
right,
that you don't have any real anti-war bona fides, that you are more invested in whatever kind of imperialist goal is extant right now outside of any real humanitarian concerns. And it's not clear, again, this is the question that many peace-minded people have been asking since the beginning. What is the end game for Ukraine? You're not going to defeat a nuclear power, so increasingly escalating with munitions, the likes of which disproportionately affect civilians and civilian children.
And your own civilians. I mean, this is taking place in their country.
Yeah.
Even if this would be resolved, they could be dealing with the literal fallout, the impact of using these weapons for decades to come, as people note. And look, I understand, and that mission of like totally defeating Russia hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Look, I understand. I don't think, given that Ukraine is the invaded party, that they should have to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I get why that wouldn't make sense to people, but that doesn't obligate us to supply them with those weapons, is A. And B, if they're using these weapons, to prevent Russia's further incursion while they negotiate a peace deal or come to a ceasefire arrangement, I think that would be like the steelman case for doing this.
Yeah.
But it's clear that they're just using this to cause more death and destruction. When? Until eventually they're totally defeated anyway? They're totally defeated, and then their country has embedded landmine sort of situation throughout the... Like, why? Why would we do that? Why would we want to contribute to that situation?
Exactly, and why I think is the right question, Robby. The Washington Post article does cite some hesitation by military experts who are wondering if this is even providing the kind of strategic advantage that it's being sold as. The author right here writes that military analysts have questioned the wisdom of using cluster munitions in areas where Ukrainian soldiers plan to maneuver, given the threat of unexploded or bombs posed to their troops. But in interviews, soldiers and government officials shrugged off the threat, arguing that troops already have to tiptoe through a gauntlet of mines and tripwires. Unexploded submunitions only at a marginal risk, they said. That seems deeply short-sighted. You're talking about using these in forested areas. Are you planning for those forested areas to be a war zone for the rest of the duration of the history of the country of Ukraine? Because that is what the risk that is being posed. Not that during the fighting, soldiers are already very careful, so who cares? This is a weapon that specifically has disproportionate effects on civilian populations. How can you be so cavalier?
Yeah, and the human toll is just staggering. I mean, as you read through like the Washington Post story, I'm struck by the, by people who are having surgery to have shrapnel removed, who they're the lucky ones, the ones who lived. Interviews with people who everybody knows someone who's been, multiple people who've been killed in this war effort. And I don't want to minimize the Russian government's responsibility for this calamity. It is horrible. Despite any, we can say that while still talking about the policy choices that led all three countries to this point. And it's so horrible, but that should create. You'd want among sober political leaders, at least in the U.S. Maybe Ukraine can't see it because their people are being killed and they're in the fray and they want revenge and they want they want to kill the people trying to kill them. That's how war works. I get it, but we, the U.S., should take a sober approach and say, how can we contribute to this in a way that ends it, a way that stops it with whatever that takes, even if that means there are parts of Ukraine that are now part of Russia or that are independent states or whatever those people want. Those people should have self-determination, right? Is it worth killing tens and hundreds of thousands of people to enforce to keep a line in the ground here rather than here?
Yeah. I mean, politically, this is a very interesting question as well in the context of the upcoming presidential election. I think one of the things that Glenn is really putting his finger on here is that whether or not you think it's in good faith or bad, that there is this growing anti-war fervor among Republican voters. It's real enough that various Republican candidates have made the choice to either soft pedal their views on wanting to kind of endlessly fund the Ukraine war or to come out strongly in opposition to it, the way that Donald Trump obviously has and has been, setting the tone for the party as a whole now for many years. And so what is Biden's response going to be? Does he think that the kind of Ukraine flag and emoji ethos that exists on Twitter among so many Democrats is going to work offline as well, where there are Americans who I think are much more persuadable on the question of, I have been dealing with high food and gas prices. I have been hearing a lot about inflation since the pandemic. We have historically high housing costs that have even predated the pandemic. We have historically high educational costs and historically high healthcare costs, and yet we're sending all this money to Ukraine. The reality is we could have eliminated all medical debt for $80 billion, and yet we're sending more than that to fight a war that we have questionable involvement with in the first instance. Am I going to support a candidate at the polls who seems to be deprioritizing American citizens in this way?
Right, and our leaders who are supporting sending all this money and weapons to Ukraine aren't really being obvious about, aren't being honest about what they think the actual goal is, right? Because they're making these very lofty kind of nebulous claims to be defending democracy abroad, that kind of thing, even though the Ukrainian government has had to resort to illiberal methods during this war effort, including the suspension of rival political parties and the free press and all sorts of things that, the first things to go out the window in a state of war. The U.S. government has also done that in the past during World War II and World War I and the Civil War and every war. That's like normal, but it undermines the case that this is a necessary defense of liberal democracy, of our own values, when really we view Russia as a foe and want to make them suffer as they do this.
Right.
And we could just be honest. Our government could just say that and see if people think that's worth funding, but they're not saying that.
Well, some of them have accidentally, Anthony Blinken, they've said as much in various statements over time, but I really do think that piece is important, but combined with the knowledge that there were all of these scuttled negotiation attempts over a year ago, at which time the death toll and the cost to Ukrainians was so much lower. Has the fighting since then meaningfully changed the negotiation terms in favor of Ukrainians? If the answer to that is no, then the American policymakers have a lot of blood on their hands. They have a lot to answer for.
Absolutely. We'll have more Rising right after this.